I said, "Hand where I can see them." Officer Greg Larson's voice was sharp, slicing through the humid night air like a blade. Jamal Carter barely had time to react before rough hands yanked him backward. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated his face, revealing confusion, then frustration. He had done nothing wrong. "What the hell is this about?" Jamal demanded, keeping his hands visible. His heart pounded, not from guilt, but from the all-too-familiar fear that came with being a black man in America. Officer Larson exchanged a smirk with his partner, Officer Blake Turner. They had been patrolling the upscale neighborhood when they saw Jamal walking out of a coffee shop. A black man in a wealthy area? That was all the probable cause they needed. "You fit the description of a suspect," Larson said mockingly. Jamal's jaw clenched. He was used to being profiled, but this was something else. He was a successful attorney, dressed in a tailored suit, carrying a briefcase. But none of that mattered to these officers. "This is harassment, and you know it," Jamal said coldly. "Big talk for a guy in cuffs." Turner sneered as he snapped the metal around Jamal's wrists. The coffee shop patrons watched in stunned silence, but no one intervened. A young white woman hesitated, gripping her phone as if contemplating recording, but one glare from the officers made her lower it. Jamal took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew how this would go. He'd be booked, processed, and forced to spend the night in jail before proving his innocence. It was humiliating, infuriating. But what these officers didn't know, what would soon turn their arrogance into fear, was that Jamal Carter wasn't just an attorney. In 48 hours, they would see him again. This time, as the judge presiding over their case. Jamal sat on the cold, hard bench in the holding cell, his wrists sore from the too tight cuffs. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow over the other men in the cell. Most of them black or Latino, most of them there for reasons as flimsy as his own. The booking process had been humiliating. Officer Turner had smirked the entire time as he took Jamal's mugshot. "Look at that, a lawyer in cuffs. Guess the law don't protect everyone, huh?" He had taunted. Jamal had held his tongue, not out of fear, but out of strategy. He knew his power wasn't in arguing with racist cops. It was in letting karma play its hand. Still, sitting in that filthy cell, waiting for his call to go through, he felt the weight of the system pressing down on him. He thought of his mother, who had always warned him about men like Larson and Turner. He thought of the countless innocent black men who hadn't been lucky enough to walk out of situations like this. But Jamal wasn't just any black man, that he was a federal judge, recently appointed to the bench. The irony was almost laughable, if it wasn't so damn tragic. His phone call finally went through. "Malcolm, I need you to get me out of here," Jamal said as soon as his best friend and fellow lawyer picked up. "What? What happened?" Malcolm's voice was already full of outrage. "I got profiled, cuffed, booked. It's the same old story." A long silence. Then Malcolm spoke, his voice dripping with restrained fury. "I'm coming now." Jamal exhaled slowly and leaned back against the wall. The game had started. The next move belonged to him. 2 days later, officers Greg Larson and Blake Turner strolled into the courtroom, their arrogance on full display. They had been called in for a misconduct hearing, an internal affairs case following their questionable arrest of Jamal Carter. "This is just procedure," Larson muttered to Turner as they adjusted their belts. "We'll get a slap on the wrist and be back on duty by tomorrow." Turner chuckled. "Yeah, like anyone's gonna believe some thug over 2 cops. But the moment they stepped through the courtroom doors, their cocky smirks vanished. Sitting high on the judge's bench, dressed in his black robes, was Jamal Carter. His eyes locked onto theirs, unreadable but piercing. The same man they had humiliated, mocked, and thrown into a cell now held the power to decide their fate. Turner's face turned ghostly pale. Larson swallowed hard, shifting nervously on his feet. "No way," Turner whispered under his breath. Jamal let the silence drag, watching them squirm. Then, in a slow, measured tone, he spoke. "Officers Larson and Turner, you stand before this court accused of misconduct, racial profiling, and unlawful arrest. As the presiding judge in this case," he leaned forward slightly, "I suggest you choose your words carefully." The entire courtroom was silent. Even the bailiff glanced between Jamal and the two officers, sensing the weight of the moment. Larson and Turner looked at each other, panic creeping into their eyes. For the first time in their careers, they realized something. They weren't untouchable, and karma had just taken the bench. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Officers Larson and Turner sat stiffly at the defendant's table, their uniforms feeling like a prison rather than a badge of honor. Their lawyer, a smug-looking man named Richard Calloway, leaned in and whispered, "Relax, boys. We'll spin this like you were just doing your job." But nothing could prepare them for what came next. Jamal adjusted his robes and stared down at them. "Before we proceed, Officers Larson and Turner, let me ask you a question," Jamal said, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of power. "Do you remember me?" The officers exchanged a quick glance. Turner's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Larson cleared his throat and sat up straighter. I don't recall, Your Honor," Larson lied, his voice faltering slightly. Jamal let out a quiet chuckle. "Interesting, because just 2 nights ago, you both arrested me, accused me of a crime I didn't commit, booked me, humiliated me." He leaned forward slightly. "And now you sit before me, facing the consequences of your actions." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor, Miriam Vasquez, a fierce advocate for civil rights, lifted an eyebrow, impressed. The jury shifted in their seats, suddenly seeing this case in a whole new light. Calloway, the officer's lawyer, jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a conflict of interest. You cannot preside over a case involving your own arrest." Jamal tilted his head. "I anticipated that objection, Counselor. That's why I won't be ruling on the verdict." However, his gaze darkened as he looked at Larson and Turner. "I will be overseeing the proceedings. And trust me, gentlemen, every ounce of evidence against you will be presented before this court." Turner's fingers twitched. Larson's jaw was tight. They had walked into the courtroom thinking this would be a slap on the wrist. Now, they realized they were in deep trouble. "Prosecution, you may proceed," Jamal declared. Miriam Vasquez stood up, smoothing the front of her suit. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said with a knowing smirk. Then she turned to face the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you will hear the story of 2 officers who abused their power, who arrested a man based on nothing but the color of his skin, who thought they could get away with it, until justice finally caught up with them." She let the words sink in. Then she stepped forward and said, "Let's begin." Miriam Vasquez approached the jury with a calm but confident demeanor. She turned toward the courtroom and said, "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to submit into evidence the body cam footage from the night of Mr. Carter's arrest." Jamal gave a small nod. "Proceed." The bailiff handed a flash drive to the court clerk, who inserted it into the courtroom's projection system. The screen lit up with grainy footage from Officer Turner's body cam, showing the moment he and Larson stopped Jamal on the sidewalk. "Look at this guy." Turner's voice crackled through the speakers. "Nice suit, fancy car, but something feels off. You sure you can afford this, buddy?" Jamal, his voice calm but firm, responded, "I don't have to justify myself to you. I'm walking home from dinner." Then came Larson's voice, smug and condescending. "Oh yeah? Then why don't you let us check your pockets? You're acting real suspicious." The courtroom watched in complete silence as the footage showed Jamal being forcefully grabbed, pushed against the car, and handcuffed despite no evidence of a crime. The footage ended with Turner muttering, "Bet the guy's got a record anyway." When the video stopped, Miriam Vasquez turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed is not law enforcement. It is racial profiling. It is abuse of power. And it is illegal." She turned toward Larson and Turner, whose faces had drained of all color. "Officers, would you like to explain yourselves?" Their lawyer, Calloway, jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this footage is being taken out of context." Jamal raised a hand, cutting him off. "Overruled," he said, his voice sharp. "The jury will decide the context." Officers Larson and Turner, answer the question. Turner shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room. Larson clenched his fists on the table. The weight of their actions was crushing them. For the first time, they knew what it felt like to be powerless. Miriam Vasquez paced slowly in front of the jury. Now that you've seen the footage, let's hear from those who witnessed this abuse firsthand. She turned to the bailiff. Prosecution calls Mr. David Hensley to the stand. A well-dressed man in his late 50s rose from the gallery and approached the witness stand. His silver hair and composed demeanor gave him an air of credibility. Once sworn in, Miriam stepped closer. Mr. Hensley, can you tell the court what you saw on the night in question? He cleared his throat. I was leaving the restaurant across the street when I saw these two officers stopping a man on the sidewalk. That man was Judge Carter. At first, I thought they were just talking to him, but then I saw them shove him against the car and cuff him, even though he wasn't resisting. Miriam nodded. Did you hear anything they said? David's jaw clenched. Yes. One of them, he pointed at Turner, said something about how a man like Judge Carter shouldn't be able to afford such a nice suit and car. It was clear to me that they had no real reason to stop him. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Turner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. And did you attempt to intervene? Miriam asked. I did, David said. I told them I'd seen everything and that they were making a mistake. But they told me to mind my own business and threatened to arrest me too. Miriam turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, we have here a respected citizen, an eyewitness who saw firsthand the racial profiling, the unnecessary force, and the abuse of power. She let her words settle before turning back to the bailiff. Prosecution calls former Officer Ryan Delgado to the stand. A burly man with a sharp gaze and a police badge pinned to his suit walked up. Once seated, Miriam gave him a measured look. Mr. Delgado, you were once a fellow officer with Larson and Turner, correct? Delgado exhaled deeply. Yes, ma'am. I worked with them for 3 years. And why did you leave the force? Delgado's jaw tightened. Because I got tired of covering for bad cops. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Please elaborate, Miriam prompted. Delgado leaned forward. Larson and Turner have a history of targeting black men for no reason. I saw them do it multiple times. They stop them, harass them, sometimes even plant minor infractions just to make an arrest. I spoke up about it to our captain, but nothing ever happened. They were always protected. Larson and Turner sat frozen, their faces drenched in sweat. So you're saying this isn't the first time they've done something like this? Miriam asked. Not even close, Delgado replied. But this is the first time they picked the wrong man. Jamal observed the officers from his bench, his expression unreadable. But deep down, justice was unfolding before his eyes. Miriam straightened her posture. No further questions, Your Honor. The courtroom air was thick with tension as Miriam Vasquez turned toward the defense table. She crossed her arms. The prosecution calls Officer Michael Turner to the stand. Turner swallowed hard but stood. His once arrogant demeanor was nowhere to be seen as he made his way to the witness stand. After being sworn in, he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Miriam approached with deliberate steps. Officer Turner, can you explain why you and Officer Larson stopped Mr. Carter that night? Turner straightened his back, trying to regain his confidence. We had reasonable suspicion. He was acting nervous. Jamal arched a brow from the bench. Nervous, he repeated. Continue. Turner cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. He was walking fast, looking around, avoiding eye contact. Miriam tilted her head. Walking fast, avoiding eye contact? Are those crimes now? Turner hesitated. No, but what, officer? Miriam interrupted. Or is it that you simply thought a black man in a nice suit was suspicious? Turner's face darkened, but he said nothing. Miriam stepped closer. Let's talk about the arrest. Why did you cuff Mr. Carter? Turner glanced at his lawyer, but Calloway offered no lifeline. He was on his own. He refused to comply, Turner finally said. Miriam raised an eyebrow. Refused to comply? The footage shows Mr. Carter asking if he was being detained, and instead of answering, you grabbed him. What exactly was he refusing to comply with? Turner's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He stopped. There was no good answer. Miriam let the silence stretch. Then she spoke, her voice razor-sharp. Officer Turner, did you or did you not assume Mr. Carter was a criminal simply because of his race? Turner's hands balled into fists on his lap. That's not fair. What's not fair? Miriam pressed. That you're being held accountable? That the man you disrespected is now the judge overseeing your case? Turner gritted his teeth. We were just doing our jobs. No, officer, Miriam said coldly. You were abusing your power. Silence. Miriam let her words sink in before turning to the judge's bench. No further questions, Your Honor. Jamal gave a small nod before shifting his gaze. Officer Ryan Larson, please take the stand. Officer Ryan Larson dragged his feet as he made his way to the witness stand. His usual cocky smirk was gone, replaced by a grim expression. He sat down and took the oath, his hands gripping the sides of the chair. Miriam Vasquez wasted no time. She stepped forward, her eyes locked onto him. Officer Larson, do you believe you and your partner followed proper procedure the night you arrested Mr. Carter? Larson hesitated, then exhaled sharply. At the time, yes. We thought we had reasonable suspicion. Miriam nodded. I see. And just to be clear, your reasonable suspicion was that Mr. Carter was walking quickly and avoiding eye contact. Larson shifted in his seat. It was more than that. We were responding to a report of a possible car theft in the area. Miriam raised an eyebrow. Car theft? Interesting. Do you have any proof that Mr. Carter was involved? Larson's lips pressed into a thin line. No, but no. Miriam cut in. So you had no evidence, yet you still chose to detain and handcuff an innocent man? Larson's face flushed. We were acting in good faith. Miriam took a step closer. Good faith? Let's test that. Officer Larson, did you or did you not hear Mr. Carter identify himself as a judge? Larson hesitated. I don't remember. Miriam smirked. You don't remember? Let me refresh your memory. She turned to the courtroom technician. Please play Exhibit C. The screen lit up with body cam footage. The court watched as Jamal Carter, standing beside his car, calmly told the officers, I am Judge Jamal Carter, and I demand to know why you are detaining me. Larson and Turner barely reacted in the video. Instead, Turner could be heard muttering, yeah, and I'm the president. The video stopped. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Miriam turned back to Larson. Did you hear that time, officer? Larson's jaw tightened. Yes. So, knowing that you were arresting a sitting judge, you still proceeded? Larson looked to his attorney, but Calloway remained silent. Answer the question, officer. Larson's shoulders slumped. Yes. Miriam stepped back. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Jamal Carter nodded, his face completely unreadable. Officer Larson, you may step down. As Larson shuffled back to his seat, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom. This case was only going one way. The courtroom was dead silent as Judge Jamal Carter sat at the bench, his fingers lightly tapping the desk. The weight of the case hung over everyone. Officers Turner and Larson sat at the defense table, their postures stiff, their faces pale. Miriam Vasquez stood, her expression calm but firm. Your Honor, the prosecution rests its case. The evidence is clear. These officers violated Mr. Carter's rights based on racial bias, ignored proper protocol, and even escalated a situation that required no force at all. They must be held accountable. The defense attorney, Richard Calloway, rose to his feet. He knew he was fighting a losing battle, but he had to try. Your Honor, my clients acted on their best judgment. They did not intend to cause harm or act out of prejudice. They were merely following department procedures. Jamal gave a slow nod. Then he leaned forward. Following procedures? His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable steel edge to it. Let me be perfectly clear. What happened that night was not procedure. It was abuse of power. It was profiling. And worst of all, it was an outright violation of my constitutional rights. Turner and Larson lowered their heads. Jamal continued, his voice unwavering. For years, men like you have gotten away with unjust arrests, humiliating innocent people, and walking free without consequence. But not this time. Not today. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. Officer Turner, Officer Larson, you are hereby found guilty of misconduct, false arrest, and violation of civil rights. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. The officers stiffened as Jamal delivered his next words. "You're sentenced to 6 months suspension without pay and mandatory racial sensitivity training. Furthermore, the department will be opening an internal investigation into other complaints against you. This is only the beginning of your reckoning." Turner clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "This is a joke," he muttered under his breath that Jamal's sharp gaze snapped to him. "I assure you, Officer Turner, this is no joke. But maybe you'll take it more seriously when I inform you that Mr. Carter has also filed a federal civil lawsuit against you and the department. I highly suggest you get yourself a good lawyer." Turner and Larson sat frozen, the reality of their downfall finally sinking in. Miriam Vasquez turned, locking eyes with Jamal. Justice had been served. A few months later, Turner and Larson walked into a new courtroom. But this time, they weren't in uniform. They weren't even sitting at the defense table. They were in the defendant's seats, and the judge presiding over their case? Not Jamal Carter, but another black judge, one they couldn't intimidate, manipulate, or escape from. Karma had come full circle.